A poor young woman let a strange man and his son stay for just one night, completely unaware that he was a millionaire CEO. Back away. From the door, Leia shouted, her voice tight with fear. She gripped the heavy fire poker with both hands. Please, came a tall man's voice from the other side, muffled by the howling wind and snow. I'm not here to hurt anyone. I just need shelter for my son. Leia's heart pounded against her ribs. Through the frosted glass, she could see the silhouette of a man, broad-shouldered, hunched over, something much smaller. It was a child. Snow was whipping around them in blinding sheets. Her fingers tightened on the doorknob. I don't let strangers into my home, she snapped. Especially not men. There was a long pause. Then the voice came again, lower, this time more desperate. I understand. I wouldn't ask if I had any other choice. He's sick. He's freezing. We just need one night to get out of this storm. Leia hesitated. The intense cold had already crept through the old wooden panels of her cabin. The electricity had gone out an hour ago. The fireplace was the only thing keeping the living room from becoming an icebox. She glanced at her cell phone. No signal. There was no one to call. It was just her, and now them. She peeked through the peephole again. The man shifted slightly, revealing a small boy curled tightly in his arms. The child coughed violently, a sound that was sharp and painful. That did it. With a groan of protest from the old hinges, Leia unlocked and opened the door. Snow blew in instantly, chilling her ankles through her socks. The man stepped forward, allowing her to get a better look. He was tall and soaked from head to toe. His hair was plastered to his forehead. The boy in his arms buried his face in the man's coat, his small body trembling. Get inside quickly, Leia muttered, stepping aside. Thank you, the man said, nodding, as he carried the boy inside. She quickly shut the door behind them and slid the bolt into place. Sit by the fireplace, she commanded. Don't touch anything else. The man obeyed without question. He gently settled the boy onto the old couch. He unzipped his own jacket and wrapped it around the child instead. Leia watched him cautiously, her grip still tight on the fire poker. What's your name? She demanded. David, he replied, and this is my son, Eli. He's 6. He has a bad cough, probably the flu. You think? She scoffed. You're dragging a sick child through a blizzard. That's beyond irresponsible. David looked down, his gaze falling as he brushed the wet hair from Eli's forehead. We had nowhere else to go, he said, quietly. She hesitated for a moment, then turned towards the kitchen. I have some dry towels and instant soup. That's all I can offer. He nodded, murmuring his thanks as she returned with the towels. He took them gratefully and began patting the boy dry with a father's quiet, gentle care. Leia watched from across the room, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. She hated this feeling. The intrusion. The painful memories it brought back. A year ago she had trusted a man with kind eyes who knocked on her door. She had lost nearly everything because of it. And now another stranger was in her home. And yet, she found herself asking, why are you out here anyway? There's nothing for miles. This storm has been on the news for days. David looked up, his eyes a dark shade of exhaustion. I was trying to get Eli to his grandmother's house, 2 towns over. The roads were closed behind us. We got stuck and then the car died. She studied his face in the flickering firelight. He looked ordinary, not particularly dangerous, but not entirely honest either. There was something hidden behind his gaze, something he wasn't saying. But then the boy. Eli coughed again, a weak, fragile sound. Leia exhaled sharply and pushed herself up, heading back to the kitchen. Chicken noodle it is, she muttered to herself. Minutes later, she returned with 2 steaming mugs. David thanked her softly. She handed him the child's mug and sat on the far edge of the room. The silence that followed was heavy, but it wasn't hostile. There was only the crackle of the fire, the clink of a spoon against ceramic, and the wind howling outside. Eli soon drifted off to sleep, his head resting on David's lap. Leah stared into the flames, forcing herself to stay awake and alert. "You don't have to be afraid," David said quietly. "I'm not afraid," she shot back, though. Her voice trembled slightly. "You're letting two strangers into your home in the middle of a blizzard. I'd say that's pretty brave. Or maybe just foolish," she replied with a slight smirk. "I could say the same about you," David chuckled softly. For the first time, the room felt a little less cold. "One night," she said firmly, her voice regaining its edge. "The storm should ease by morning. Then you have to leave." David nodded. "One night, that's all we need." She glanced at the boy's peaceful, sleeping face. Then she looked back at the man who held him so gently. And for the first time in a long, long time, she wondered. She wondered if opening her door had been a terrible mistake or the first right thing she had done in ages. The wind howled outside like a restless spirit rattling the windows of the small cabin. The power was completely out now. The fire in the hearth flickered, with quiet defiance casting golden shadows on the walls. Leah lit 2 old candles she had stashed away in a kitchen drawer. Their flames trembled as she placed them on the table between her and David. The soup had cooled slightly, but its warmth lingered. Eli had only managed a few sips before drifting back to sleep, safe, in a cocoon of coats and blankets, on the couch. His breathing was still a little uneven, but it was slower now, steadier. Leah sat on the floor near the fire, her knees tucked under her, hands wrapped around a chipped ceramic mug. David sat across from her, his own mug in hand, his face partially illuminated by the firelight. He looked less imposing in the soft candlelight. He looked human, tired but calm. "She loves chicken noodle," he said, after a long pause, nodding toward his son. "She?" David chuckled, softly. "Sorry, it's a habit. His mother. She passed away a few years ago. But every time I made chicken noodle soup for Eli, I always said it was because she would have too." Leah glanced at the sleeping boy, her features softening just a little. "He's sweet," she said. "Polite." "I try," David said, then looked down. "He's all I've got." There was a raw vulnerability in his voice that made Leah shift uncomfortably. She wasn't used to that. The men she had known carried their secrets behind a mask of charm. But David wasn't trying to impress her. He was just here and honest. "I'm sorry about his mother," she said softly. "Thank you." He met her gaze, and for a moment, the fire crackled between them like a bridge being slowly built. Leah stood up abruptly. "I have a clean blanket in the back. I'll go grab it." She walked down the short hallway, the old wooden floorboards creaking under her feet. She paused when she reached her linen closet and looked at her softest blanket. It was the one her grandmother had, quilted for her years ago, white with tiny blue flowers. She rarely used it, keeping it folded neatly at the very top of the stack. She sighed, then pulled it down. When she returned to the living room, she stopped short in the doorway. David was on the floor beside Eli. The child was half asleep, moaning softly. Unaware of her presence, David dipped a cloth into a bowl of water and carefully wrung it out. With slow, practiced hands, he pressed the cool cloth gently to Eli's forehead. He whispered to him so quietly, Leah couldn't make out the words. The cloth? It was one of hers. One of the last clean white hand towels she owned. She watched as David rinsed the cloth again, wiped Eli's flushed cheeks, then carefully folded the towel and placed it beside the bowl. Then he stood, walked into the kitchen, and washed the cloth thoroughly before returning it to its spot, folded just the way she had stored it. He never even saw her watching. Leah looked down at the precious quilt in her arms, then slowly stepped back into the room. "Here," she said gently, holding it out. David turned, slightly startled. "This is beautiful." "It's warm," she replied simply, "and it's clean." He took it from her, his hand brushing against hers for a brief moment. "Thank you." She sat back down by the fire, but this time a little closer. For the first time since he'd arrived, the room felt full, not just of people, but of a peaceful presence. As David settled beside his son, again adjusting the quilt over the boy's small frame, he looked over at Leah. "You didn't have to let us in," he said softly. "I know. You didn't have to feed us or offer your best blanket or pretend not to be scared." She looked at him, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm not pretending." He smiled, a faint but genuine smile. "Still," he said, "thank you for everything." "I won't forget this night." Neither of them said anything after that. The fire crackled, the wind howled, but in the heart of the storm, the little cabin glowed softly. And for one night, warmth had won. The snow had not let up. By morning, the world outside the cabin was buried under a thick, white silence. The roads were completely invisible beneath the storm. Trees groaned under the immense weight of the snow, and even the faint tracks from last night had vanished. Leah stepped onto the porch, wrapped in a thick coat, and stared out at the blank landscape. "They're saying the county might not plow the roads until tomorrow," she said as she re-entered the cabin. David looked up from where he was, feeding Eli spoonfuls of warm soup. "Then we're stuck," she nodded, grimly. "Another night at least." He met her eyes. "I'm sorry. It's not your fault," she said, though her voice carried a hint of weariness. "Let's just make the best of it." That day they settled into a rhythm that neither of them expected. David volunteered to chop firewood, swinging the axe with clean, practiced force behind the cabin. Leah, surprised at his strength and precision, watched from the window before turning back to the kitchen. She made fresh dough for biscuits and started a pot of homemade chicken soup, the rich scent of thyme and garlic filling the small space. When a leak sprung near the back door, David patched it with tools he borrowed from her old shed, climbing onto a shaky chair with careful, steady hands. He fixed the loose hinge on her bedroom door without being asked, and reinforced the coat hook near the entryway, smiling when Leah raised an eyebrow. "You're handy," she noted. "Years of fixing what I couldn't afford to replace," he replied simply. Eli's cough persisted throughout the morning. His forehead felt warm to the touch again. This time Leah didn't hesitate. She brewed a fragrant ginger tea with honey, cooled it to a safe temperature, and held the cup for him to sip. She dampened a cloth with cool water, checking his temperature with gentle fingers. When he became restless, she brought out a faded, well-loved teddy bear from a box in her bedroom. She sat beside him on the couch, whispering stories as she dabbed his cheeks. "It's okay, sweetheart," she murmured, smoothing his hair back. "We're going to get you all better." David, watching quietly from the kitchen, said nothing, but his jaw clenched. He was so used to doing it all, himself being both mother and father, protector and provider. Watching Leah tend to Eli with such natural tenderness stirred something deep inside him. She had no obligation, no reason to care this much. Yet here she was, kneeling on the hardwood floor beside a boy who wasn't hers, singing softly under her breath while wiping sweat from his brow. Later that afternoon, while Leah went to fetch more blankets, David stood at the door to the bedroom and watched. She was sitting on the floor next to the bed where she'd moved Eli, his small hand cradled in both of hers. She was humming a soft lullaby, maybe one from her own childhood. The old teddy bear was tucked in beside him. Her golden hair fell forward as she leaned over to press her hand to his forehead again. Every single gesture was full of care, of presence. David's throat tightened. He turned away before she could see the way his eyes stung with unshed tears. That evening, as the wind howled outside and the cabin glowed with firelight, the three of them gathered in the living room. Leah told a fairy tale, something about a brave girl who tamed a snowstorm with nothing but kindness. Her voice danced through the room, and Eli clapped his hands when she finished. David made animals out of folded paper scraps, his attempts clumsy, but endearing. Eli giggled as a paper moose with lopsided antlers tipped over. Then Eli pulled out a small notebook and some colored pencils Leah had found for him. He drew furiously, his tongue sticking out in concentration. When he was done, he tore out the page and held it up proudly. "This is you," he said, pointing to a figure with golden hair, opening the door. The drawing was of a snow-covered cabin. A tall man and a small boy stood outside in the storm. A woman, Leah, was opening the door, and a warm golden light was spilling out from behind her. He taped it to the wall with a strip of leftover wrapping tape. "This is my second home," he declared. Leah stared at the simple drawing, unable to speak. David looked at her, not with gratitude this time, but with something much deeper. The way her fingers had brushed Eli's hair, the warmth she poured into everything she did, her quiet, unshakable strength. He smiled, and for the first time in a long, long time he felt the fragile, frightening beginnings of something he hadn't let himself feel in years. Hope. The storm had finally passed. The sun rose weakly behind the clouds, casting a silver-gray sheen over the snow-drenched trees. Leah stood in the doorway of the cabin, already dressed in her thick coat and scarf, her work boots crunching lightly on the porch. The air was still sharp with cold, but it was manageable enough that the roads might finally be plowed. Inside, David and Eli were still asleep, curled together on the couch, breathing softly in the early morning light. Leah hesitated at the door. She wanted to say something, anything. Ask if they would still be here. When she got back from work, offer them another night if they needed it. But the words felt heavy in her throat. This was her first shift in days at the diner, and she couldn't afford to miss it. So she left the fire stoked with extra wood stacked by the hearth and a small note on the kitchen counter, back by 4. Make yourselves at home. By the time she reached the town's diner, her thoughts had drifted constantly back to them. Every time the bell above the front door jingled, she looked up, half expecting to see them. But it was never David, never Eli. When her shift ended, she practically ran to catch the shuttle back up the mountain. The sky was turning a soft orange by the time she made it back to her cabin. The porch was quiet, with no new footprints in the fresh layer of snow, no sound of giggles from inside. Her heart sank. She pushed the door open. The fire had burned low, but it was still alive. The blankets were folded neatly on the couch. The dishes in the sink had been washed and were sitting in the drying rack. The room was clean, almost as if they had never been there. They were gone. A sharp ache bloomed in her chest. On the dining table lay a piece of folded paper, weighed down by something small and sleek. She approached it slowly. The paper was cream-colored and faintly lined. Her name wasn't on it, but she knew it was for her. She unfolded it. "Thank you for the warmth, for the kindness, for reminding me that people like you still exist in this world." I'll never forget it. There was no signature, just a line below it, scrawled in a softer, almost hesitant handwriting. "You helped more than you know." Beside the wool note sat a black card. No name, no bank, just a single, small chip and a strip of numbers. She picked it up, her heart thudding in her chest. It felt heavier than a regular credit card, sleek and mysterious. A black card, the kind only the ultra-wealthy carried. She stared at it, completely stunned. Confusion flooded her first, then disbelief, then something she could not quite name. She set it down slowly and sat on the edge of the couch where David had sat just the night before, telling stories to his son. Her fingers tightened around the paper note. He was gone without a goodbye, without an explanation, without her getting a chance to say what had begun to build inside her heart. She hadn't expected it to hurt this much. She thought she would feel relief, space to finally breathe again. Her house was returned to her, quiet and empty. But instead she felt a hollow throb, like someone had opened a door in her heart only to slip away, before she knew they had truly entered. Her eyes burned. The cabin was silent, and for the first time in a very long time, Leah cried. Not from fear, not from pain, but from the deep ache of missing something she had never even expected to find, and not knowing if she would ever see it or them again. The next morning, Leah stood in line at the only bank in town, the mysterious black card clutched tightly in her coat pocket. Her breath fogged up the glass doors as she waited. The entire way there, her mind had waged a war with itself. One side screamed at her to use the card to solve her problems. The other side held fast to the one thing she had always clung to, her pride. When her number was called, she approached the teller's desk with hesitant steps. "I found this," she said, placing the card gently on the counter. "I just want to know who it belongs to." The teller gave her a strange look but typed a few of the digits into her system. After a few seconds, her eyebrows lifted in surprise. "This is a private account, ma'am," the woman said carefully. "There's no name attached to it publicly. It's a very high-tier status. I can't disclose any details, but whoever gave you this must trust you very much." "I don't want the money," Leah said quickly. "I'm not here to use it. I needed to know." The woman nodded slowly and slid the card back across the counter. Leah left with more questions than answers, and when she got home, she tucked the card away in a drawer, unopened and untouched. Days turned into weeks. The snow began to melt. The wind softened and the nights grew quieter. Leah went back to her routine, patching up the cabin, working at the library 2 days a week, and taking extra shifts at the diner whenever she could. But everything felt dimmer now. The echo of laughter from that stormy night stayed with her. So did the image of a dark-haired man sitting by the fire making paper animals for his son. She found herself waking in the middle of the night, staring at the door, half expecting to hear a knock. Then one Monday morning, everything unraveled. She arrived at the small town library only to find a sign taped to the door, closed indefinitely. Funding eliminated. Inside, her supervisor was boxing up the last of the books. "I'm so sorry, Leah," the woman said, barely able to meet her eyes. "They pulled the plug on all the rural locations. There's nothing we can do." She walked home that day with numb legs. Every step felt heavier than the last. 2 jobs gone in under 3 months, no family to fall back on, no backup plan, and the bills were already piling up. By the end of the week, her wood pile was dwindling. The refrigerator was half empty. Her savings account dipped below $20. She tried selling her crafts online, even her old typewriter, but nothing stuck. The silence in the cabin grew heavier and more oppressive with every passing day. Then came the letter. It arrived on a Wednesday afternoon, slipped under her door in a thick cream-colored envelope. Her name was written by hand in elegant, deliberate strokes. She opened it slowly. Inside was a single page printed on fine letterhead. "Dear Ms. Leah Thompson," it began, "we are pleased to invite you to a private interview for the newly established community outreach program within R&H Holdings. We are seeking individuals of rare character, strong values, and demonstrated compassion. Your name was personally recommended. Please arrive at our downtown office at the time listed below. Travel arrangements have been made on your behalf. Sincerely, David R., Chief Executive Officer, R&H Holdings." Her hands trembled. She read it again, and then a third time. "David." She sat down hard on the edge of the couch, the very same spot where he had once sat beside Eli. She pressed the letter to her chest, breathing deeply. He had remembered, and he had found her. She didn't know what this interview was or why it was happening now, or why he had reached out after all, this time. But one thing was absolutely certain. Her story with David was not over, yet. Leah stood in the lobby of the gleaming glass building, the polished marble floors reflecting her worn boots, which were still speckled with mud from the mountain road. The ceiling stretched high above her, trimmed with golden light, and the people around her moved with quiet purpose in sleek suits and crisp heels. She felt like a stranger in a foreign land. Clutching the invitation letter in one hand, she approached the receptionist. I have an appointment with R&H Holdings. Leah Thompson, the fat woman finished for her, smiling warmly. Yes, we've been expecting you. Please take the elevator to the 32nd floor. Mr. Rivera will meet you there. Personally. Leah blinked. Mr. Rivera? Yes, the receptionist said, already dialing a number on her headset. He's the CEO. She stepped into the elevator, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The numbers above the doors ticked steadily upward. Each floor brought back a memory. Eli giggling beside the fire. David handing her a mug of soup, his voice thanking her in the quiet of that snow-covered night. When the doors slid open, the space before her was quiet and elegant. A woman in a navy dress gestured politely and led her to a large, glass-walled office. And there he was. David stood near the window, tall and composed in a charcoal suit. His back was to her, but as she stepped in, he turned around. Their eyes met, and for a moment time paused. He smiled, a warm, steady, familiar smile. Leah. She took a shaky breath. David! He stepped forward, his hands relaxed at his sides. He looked the same, but different. Stronger somehow, more in control, but with the same quiet kindness in his eyes. I was wondering if you'd come, he said. You invited me, she replied, her voice soft. I hoped you'd say yes, he said, gently, then gestured to a small sitting area near the window. Please, have a seat. She lowered herself into the plush armchair, gripping the sides slightly. He walked over to a nearby shelf, pulled out a flat folder, and handed it to her. Inside was a single piece of paper. A child's drawing. The cabin in the snow, a tall man, a small boy, and a woman with golden hair opening the door. Her eyes widened. You kept it, she whispered. I took it, David admitted. That morning, I knew Eli would want me to. He called you? Our angel that night. I wanted to keep a piece of what that night meant to us. She looked up at him. David sat across from her now, leaning forward earnestly. Didn't tell you who I was. I didn't plan for any of this to happen, but I've spent every moment since trying to figure out how to repay something that can't be repaid. Leah shook her head, slowly. I didn't do anything extraordinary. You gave us shelter, dignity. You gave Eli warmth, safety when we had neither. And you gave me something I thought I had lost for good. He paused, his gaze intense. Hope. She didn't speak, her hands tightening around the precious drawing. David continued, his voice steady. And sure, I used to think the only way to build something lasting was through power and control. But you reminded me what real strength looks like. Quiet, brave, and kind. So I created a program. Community outreach, education, rural aid, all of it rooted in that one night in your cabin. He stood and walked to his desk, retrieving another folder. And I want you to lead it. Leah blinked, processing his words. Me? He nodded. You've lived it. You understand what it means to give without expecting anything in return. That's the kind of leadership I want. She looked down at the folder in her lap, then back at him, her voice trembling slightly. This isn't about the money, is it? David smiled. No, It never was. She looked at him. This man who had once sat beside her fire in worn-out boots and flannel. The man who was now offering her not just a job, but a place in the new story he was writing. And she nodded. "I'll do it," she said. Not for the title, not for the fancy office, but because in his eyes she saw something she hadn't seen in her own reflection for a very long time. Purpose. And because she believed him, not just as a CEO, but as the man who had once whispered, "Thank you," in the dark and had meant every single word. The weeks that followed moved with a quiet, steady rhythm, but each day wove Leah and David closer. Together. Their new program under R&H Holdings, which they named the Open Door Initiative, focused on offering long-term shelter, job, training, and childcare for single parents and the homeless. The entire foundation was built around the simple principle Leah had unknowingly embodied the night she opened her cabin door, that kindness without conditions can change lives. In every meeting room, on every site visit, through every late-night email exchange, they stood side by side. They debated fiercely. David was pragmatic and results-driven. Leah was empathetic and fiercely protective of the people they served. Sometimes they clashed, but they always listened. And by the end of every discussion, they always found a path forward that held both integrity and heart. Leah had never felt more seen, more valued. Each morning, a coffee waited on her desk, made exactly how she liked it. 2 sugars, no cream, a sprinkle of cinnamon on top. David never said a word about it, but she noticed every single time. Some nights they worked late, reviewing proposals and talking through complicated logistics. On those nights he would walk her out to her car in comfortable silence, their shoulders occasionally brushing in the darkness. Still, no words were spoken about what was growing between them. There were just looks that lingered, a moment too long and small, gestures that meant more than either of them dared to say aloud. Then came the gala. It was a high-profile fundraising event hosted at the company's flagship site, a converted warehouse now serving as a state-of-the-art transitional living center. Donors, press, city officials, and nonprofit leaders filled the room. Leah, wearing a simple but elegant navy dress, gave a speech about the night everything changed for her. She spoke of firelight and soup and a little boy with a fever. She did not mention David by name, but the moment she stepped off the stage, a reporter cornered her. "Some say your sudden rise within R&H is due to a personal involvement with Mr. Rivera. Can you confirm or deny that your role is simply a result of favoritism?" Leah froze. Her breath caught in her throat. Her hands trembled slightly, but she held her ground. "I was offered this position based on..." Never got to finish. David stepped forward calmly, but with clear purpose, his voice even, as he addressed the small crowd that had gathered. "If I may," he said, placing a steady, reassuring hand on Leah's back. Then, without any hesitation, he took her hand gently in his own and turned to face the room. "The woman standing beside me," he said, his voice resonating with something deeper than defense, changed the entire direction of my life. When I had nothing to offer, no power, no title, she offered me and my son shelter without asking for anything. In return, he looked at Leah then, and something flickered between them that silenced even the most skeptical reporter in the room. She didn't see a CEO or a man with influence. She saw 2 people in need, and she opened her door. He turned back to the crowd, his grip on her hand firm and protective. "Everything we have built here was born from that single moment, and if this company has done anything good since then, it is because of her heart." A hush fell over the room, and then it was broken by a wave of applause. Leah looked down at their joined hands, still warm, still steady. She had no idea when he had reached for her, or why her heart suddenly felt like it might break from something too full and beautiful to contain. Later that night, when the lights had dimmed and the last of the guests had gone, they stood alone in the center of the vast, empty room. You didn't have to say all that, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. David looked at her, his eyes soft in the dim light. Yes, he said. I did. And for the first time, he didn't let go of her hand. A year later, winter returned, gently. The snow drifted down like silk, covering the fir trees and winding roads with a quiet grace. At the end of one such road stood the old cabin, no longer forgotten, but now lovingly restored. Its bones were the same, its spirit intact, warm, humble, and waiting. David had invited Leah and Eli for the weekend. After a year of working side by side, building shelters, launching programs, and learning each other's every rhythm, it felt like a homecoming. Still, Leah had not known where they were going until they made that final turn onto her old road. She gasped when she saw it. The cabin stood like a memory made real. Her boots crunched on the freshly sanded steps. The front door still had the same familiar creak. The scent of pine and cinnamon lingered in the air just as she remembered. And there, above the mantel, carefully framed in glass, hung Eli's drawing. The drawing of a golden-haired woman opening her door to a man and his son in the snow. You kept it? Here, she whispered. David smiled softly. It was the first place Eli truly called home. Again. The weekend unfolded with a gentle, peaceful rhythm. They cooked together in the small kitchen, now bright and filled with laughter. Soft music hummed from speakers David had discreetly installed. Eli ran from room to room as if he had always belonged there, asking if they could please stay forever. That night after dinner, Eli fell asleep on the couch beneath the very same quilt she had once wrapped around him. Leah stepped out onto the porch, her arms crossed against the chill, watching the snowflakes drift down. David joined her silently, standing close beside her. After a long, comfortable pause, he turned to her. Will you come with me for a moment? She followed him to the bottom of the steps where the warm light spilled from the cabin door behind them. He reached into his coat pocket, and there, on the very spot where she had first opened her door to him in fear and desperation, he knelt down. He held out a simple, elegant silver ring. Inside the band were 6 small, engraved words. Thank you for opening the door. His eyes met hers, shining with a love that was deep and true. I used to believe I didn't deserve a family, he said, quietly, his voice full of emotion. That what I had lost couldn't ever be found again. But you changed all of that. With your hands, with your heart. You made room for us when no one else would. Her eyes filled with happy tears. I can't promise you perfection, he continued, his voice trembling just slightly. But I promise to always keep the door open for you, for Eli, for whatever life we build together. He held the ring out, a silent question in his gaze. Leah, will you open it? One more time? This time, for a lifetime. Leah didn't answer with words. She knelt down beside him in the snow, wrapped her arms around his neck, and held on, not with fear, but with a love that felt as solid and real as the ground beneath them. A small sound broke the moment. Eli stood in the open doorway, rubbing his sleepy eyes. Miss Leah. Mom, you made Dad smile like he did that first night. David laughed, a joyful sound that echoed in the still night air, holding Leah even closer. She wiped her eyes and looked at the boy who had unknowingly stitched their lives together, and then at the man who had finally, truly come home. The snow continued to fall around them, soft and silent. There was no grand crowd, no flashy diamond, just one door that was once opened in a storm and would now never be closed again. Sometimes the most beautiful beginnings come from the simple act of opening a door. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that kindness always matters, that love can arrive when you least expect it, and that second chances often come wrapped in snow and silence, then we invite you to be part of more moments like this. Subscribe to Soul-Stirring Stories for more tales of hope, love, resilience, and the small choices that change lives forever. Let your heart be stirred one story at a time.